Speaking of oppositional defiant disorder, um, what comes to mind, or one person that comes to mind, is maybe Hitler, maybe Napoleon, and some of our most recent presidents, that have certain narcissistic disorders. Um, but speaking of Napoleon, just a joke about his leaders. Um, Speaking of Napoleon, a very interesting character, uh, very persistent, insistent, resilient, and um, he single-handedly kind of brought the order in France during the French Revolution. He stopped the mass executions and people being sent to guillotine and all that. Yet, but then he stopped that, and then France, his militaristic um, skills got him going to Austria, crossing Alps to Italy, where he committed a lot of looting, stole the art and brought it to the Louvre, the French museum, where lots of arts has been taken. Now, what is very interesting about Napoleon is that and I'm drawing this analysis based on Andrew Roberts' book, A Life, Napoleon, A Life, which is a very interesting book, where Andrew Roberts, I think he tries to say that Napoleon the Great, he tries to compare him like that he's the Great, like Alexander the Great, Napoleon the Great. Well, that's debatable. A lot of people think that he's just a dictator, and he took over a lot of places, looted a lot of places, contributed to the. He didn't contributed. He kind of revivaled the German nationalism, what later on became a total Nazi and fascist regime. When he took over the German countries, one of the boys, when he was in the battlefield, and he was not in the battlefield, he was close to the battlefield, resting at his camp, and one of the young man, like he was 18, 19 years old, was trying to approach him with a knife to kill Napoleon. And so the guards caught him. The next day, Napoleon went to speak to the boy, and he speak to this, literally a boy, 18, 19 years old. And he asked him, if I let you go, would you do this again? And the boy answered, he goes, yes, I would. He says, I would try to kill you again. And Napoleon ended up sending him to executing him. But before his execution, the boy shouted aloud, long live to Germany, and, long live to Germany. And this is where how indirectly we can contribute to nationalistic aspirations, because Napoleon, when Germany was ran over by Napoleon, and he put in different rules, and he took over a lot of stuff in there, attempted to change and all that, and then Germany again in World War One, they lose the war, and as a result, because they lost the war, they had to pay a lot of reparations and all that. During Great Depression, 1920s and 1930s, you would have to carry money. That's how big inflation was. You had to use wheelbarrow to pull the money to go buy bread. That's how bad it was in Germany. And of course, unfortunately for Germany, Hitler comes over, revives these nationalistic ideas, that Aryan race, that based on a Darwinistic idea that survival of the fittest. And when Darwin said that, they used Darwin as a justification that they are the survival of the fittest, that German Aryan race, they are the most surviving race, they should be the masters of the world, and this is how the world. But this is how Napoleon struck all these ideas. Yes, he stopped one problem, which is the French Revolution. It was a big problem. French Revolution was a big problem, and it really sent terror to a lot of leaders around the world. I mean, like a German philosopher, Immanuel Kant, when he found out that there was a French Revolution, he was, I believe, in university, one of the universities in Germany. He always took a break at noon, exactly at noon. He was so articulate about that and meticulous. He would always take that time. And then one day when Germany, when he heard French Revolution was going down in Paris, he actually was late that day because he was trying to cope with the events and, you know, the bloodshed and the violence that were occurring in France. But what is very interesting about a Napoleon is that that idea of persistence and that idea of constantly going into a battlefield. Now, one time in close to, I believe, to on the border somewhere in Italy and Austria, he was caught. He had only 3,000 soldiers, and he was caught with 10,000 soldiers, Austrian soldiers, and they had a confrontation. So some of the soldiers and commanders heard, oh, this is Napoleon, and Napoleon had only 3,000, and they had 10,000 soldiers. Now, that's 3 times more than Napoleon had. So Napoleon got up in the front of them because they couldn't tell how many soldiers, because it was in a kind of forest, how many soldiers did Napoleon have. So Napoleon knew if he didn't step up to the plate, they would have been all killed and captured and by Austrian army. So he stood up and he said, you see this sword? You see, if you do not surrender, all my soldiers, you all will be killed. You are going to surrender, you are going to drop your weapons and your swords, and this is how he took over all these 10,000 soldiers. The commander decided to surrender, and when they surrendered, they later on they realized that Napoleon had only 3,000 soldiers, and that was an interesting idea. The courage that he stood up and he said, "Okay, these are the demands. If you don't, we're going to slaughter you." And of course, Austrian soldiers got scared and they just surrendered. And later, when they realized, wow, wait a second, Napoleon had only 3,000 soldiers, and they could have, they should have been negotiating the terms. So that is very interesting in terms of leadership skills, to step up, to have that kind of courage and all that. But at the same time, it's a kind of narcissistic idea. I am kind of going all over the place, but this is a little bit on Napoleon and how Napoleon took over, with France. I mean, he was a little boy. One of the landlady that he rented place when he moved from Corsica to Paris. He was renting an apartment. She used to call him a midget. So he was short and small and all that, but yet he exerted so much power and force that he mobilized thousands and thousands of soldiers to march from France all the way to close to Austria, then Italy, Poland, and of course he also marched all the way to Moscow. He actually spent a few nights in Moscow, and of course that was a downfall of Napoleon. He went and he drank Russian whiskey and vodka and in Kremlin, where the Russians ran away to St. Petersburg and left Moscow to Napoleon. And Napoleon, when he withdrew all the army, the soldiers and everything froze, while the Russians were chasing him down the road, down back to Poland and all that. I mean, it was really bad. The Russian winter was really bad. And it's the same thing that happened to, of course, later on when Hitler decides to take over Russia. His soldiers freeze. They did not go as far as Napoleon did, in the Battle of Stalingrad. That was the kind of turning point in the World War II. But in terms of Napoleon, yeah, I will talk about it more, but it's just an interesting character and resilience and force that he exerted over his soldiers and the people that he commanded. Next time I will talk about the Battle of Waterloo. Also, interesting point about how Jefferson bought Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon. I will discuss some of those ideas later. All right, that's it for right now.